Coming up this time, Richard and Judy and author...
Hello, my name is Peter Swanson.
...discuss his book...
I wrote The Kind Worth Killing.
...on the Richard and Judy Book Club podcast.
Our next title is a very clever book indeed. In fact, it's brilliant. It's genius.
It is a great read.
Oh, come on, it's such a clever idea.
Well, yes. You do seem a bit excited about a story about a man who might be thinking of killing his wife.
Oh, come on, Judy, you've got to admit it's clever.
OK, let's find out a bit more about Peter Swanson.
The Richard and Judy Book Club podcast Autumn Reads.
Whenever I finish a book, getting to the end of a novel and writing the end is really the greatest feeling there is. The only feeling as a writer I think that's topped it is when I heard that my first book, The Girl with a Clock for a Heart, was accepted for publication. But really, the feeling of getting to an end of the book, to know that, you know, even whether it's good or bad, to get to the end and say, you know, I've written my 350 pages and it's a complete story, and of course I'm going to have to go back and fix a lot of things, but actually doing it is a remarkable feeling, and I always feel very excited and, of course, exhausted. My writing routine is pretty regular. I get up every day, including the weekend, and I sit down at my computer and I work until I have about 500 to 750 words of whatever it is I happen to be working on. I try and do that every single day, no matter what mood I'm in, and sometimes the words come fairly easily, and lots of times they don't. The best piece of advice I can pass to wannabe writers, it's very familiar advice, I'm sure they've heard it before. It's simply that you need to write every day. You need to find a time, even if you only have 20 minutes, and you need to sit down and write during those 20 minutes and try and produce something like 100 words. And eventually, if you do that every single day, you have a short story or a novella or maybe even a novel, and you can't wait to feel like you're in the mood to write. You have to force yourself to do it, even if nothing is clicking. Just start putting the words down on the page, and sometimes miraculously, it begins to work.
Well, welcome back to the Richard and Judy Book Club in conjunction with WHSmith. And have we got a thrilling thriller for you? This is called The Kind Worth Killing. Great title, by Peter Swanson. Now, Peter's story hits the ground running, and then it accelerates from there. Two strangers meet in the business lounge at Heathrow Airport, and over cocktails and increasingly intimate conversation, they hatch a murder plot. Now, is this all just fantasy between them and a silly, slightly drunken bravado? Or from the moment that Ted and Lily meet, is someone, and maybe more than someone, doomed to die? It's absolutely riveting, and we're talking to Peter by the magic of Skype now. Peter, thank you so much for writing such a fantastic thriller, as it turns out, for our book club list. We absolutely loved it.
Thank you.
What, of course, really catches the imagination is this line between sort of slightly malevolent fantasy turning into reality, crossing into reality. What do you think the chances are of people meeting like this in real life and beginning with a fantasy of killing somebody and then ending up following through?
Well, I think there's a likelihood that two people could meet on a plane and have too much to drink, and someone might say something along the lines of, you know, I've been thinking of killing my wife. I can see that happening. What's, you know, in reality, when that happens in the book, probably the woman in that case would ask to shift her seat or
Absolutely,
check in with the stewardess or pretend to go to sleep. But in this case, so I think it's less likely that the person you told that or confessed that to would say, no, actually, I think that's a good idea, which Lily does in the book. And you know, let's talk about this farther, or I'd be happy to help you. So,
because of course,
so that's probably less likely.
Because of course, what he doesn't realise, and this is what defines the likelihood of this happening, is that she's completely psychotic. I mean, she's an extremely dangerous person.
Yeah, she is. So it's funny, when I started writing this book, it was much more Ted's book. And you know, it starts off, it's narrated by Ted and Lily, and it was always going to be more about Ted. And then I started writing Lily's backstory. And she just became so much more interesting to me, and she really, as you know, she kind of takes over the book in terms of being the protagonist.
It's sort of, it is, isn't it? A sort of modern reworking of the Patricia Highsmith novel, Strangers on a Train.
Yeah, it is to a certain degree. I love the idea of two strangers meeting and having that meeting change their lives forever. So I was attracted to that. And Strangers on a Train has a very different feel because it's much more of a, what I think of as Bruno in that book is sort of stalking the main character and destroying his life. And this was more like, I like to think these two met each other. It's more like kismet. It's more like a romantic story between murderers because they sort of, it's like a like-minded thing that they discover they have on this plane. So it's a little different in that way. But yeah, I love the idea of, you're sitting in a bar and having a drink and someone comes up and everything changes.
It also juggles with the notion that some people, and this is in the title obviously, some people are a bit more worth killing than others. There are some people that it would be an absolute crime and a sin on every moral level possible to imagine to kill. But there are some people who kind of deserve it in a way. And that to me, that's almost like the newspaper reader's reaction. They might read about a killing and say, well, yeah, a terrible, terrible thing to do, but actually she deserved it. She was asking for it.
Yeah, I mean, as Lily sort of spells out her philosophy, and what's really interesting is how many people at book readings come up to me and sort of say, I really kind of secretly liked Lily and her philosophy. And it makes me a little nervous because I'm like, well, don't do anything about it. Don't use my book as a guide. But I think, she has a very practical view, which is we're all going to be dead in 100 years. And if a few bad apples get pushed along a little too soon, what's the harm in that? She has the big picture view of killing, and it just doesn't bother her in a moral way. But
it's very hard, isn't it, to kind of graduate the scale of the kind worth killing. I mean, there would be a vast number of people, for example, who would say that one end of the scale, Osama bin Laden was worth killing. Where do those graduations begin? How far back down the list do you have to get before you say, maybe they're just about worth killing? And that's what I think the book does very well. It plays very well with those notions.
But Miranda, Ted's wife, really is not a nice piece of work, is she? No,
she's terrible. And I think, without giving too much away, there are numerous murders in this book. Some of which I think as a reader you can feel are somewhat justified. I mean, certainly the earlier one with Lily as a young woman, and then those lines are blurred a little because she sees that line as pretty far along. I mean, for instance, just a sort of a shallow, callous boyfriend type who's just going to make women miserable for the rest of his life. She's like, get rid of him. I mean,
no, but I think it's a very good point you make. Her first murder, as a much, much younger woman, as a young girl, I think justifies what she becomes. Because she, I kind of agree with you. I think that first murder was pretty much justified. And then and that allows her to move into this extraordinary field that she then occupies for the rest of her life and the rest of the book. It's fantastic.
I believe you're very interested in Alfred Hitchcock, yeah?
Yes, very.
Yeah, and you're writing sonnets to accompany all his 53 films.
I am. I've written them all. It's actually completed. Some are, some maybe need reworking, but it was a great project. I did it a couple winters ago, and it was great because it gave me, I got to rewatch all his films and then watch the ones I hadn't seen before. So now I've seen all of his films, which is fascinating. Anytime, he made 53 films, so it's so interesting to see them all. And then to write these sonnets, and it was great fun, actually.
Did you write, you must have written one for Rear Window then?
I certainly did.
Oh, I love that.
Is that your favorite?
Is that your favorite?
Yeah. Well, one of them. I love Hitchcock. I love all his films, but I really love Rear Window. It is terrific.
Yeah, it might be his best. I mean, I know everyone's saying now Vertigo, but Rear Window is complex as well. I think psychologically, even though it's so entertaining that you don't think of it that way. But it's really it's just a brilliant, almost perfect film.
I think so too.
Well, apart from all that, what's next? What can we expect from you next?
Well, I'm sort of nearly finished with my third thriller. It's another standalone thriller. Mm-hmm. It's actually about a young woman who lives in London who moves to Boston for 6 months with an apartment swap with a second cousin that she doesn't know. And he moves to her place in London. And she when she arrives in Boston, she begins to think that the person whose home she's borrowed is a very bad person.
Okay, and when's that out? When does that come out?
We don't have an exact date. Since I'm finishing it up now, I would say in about a year.
Okay. Well, listen, it's a pleasure talking to you across the Atlantic with you and your Massachusetts home and us in our London hotel room. And a real pleasure talking about what drove this extraordinary novel. It's such good fun to read. Thank you so much for joining us by the internet, Peter Swanson. It's The Kind Worth Killing. It's one of the thrillingest thrillers that we've had on the Richard and Judy Book Club list. And if you are thrilled enough to buy it from WHSmith here in the UK, you will find a great deal of extra information in the back, including a quite different Q&A session in print, of course, between ourselves and the author, as is the case with all the books in the Richard and Judy Book Club. But there it is, The Kind Worth Killing, a cracking read.
Draw the curtains and snuggle up with a Richard and Judy Book Club podcast, exclusive to WHSmith.
Now, can I just say from the outset, Judy, I have absolutely no plans at all to join forces with a third party to murder you. So you can speak your mind freely in this section, okay?
Well, I think you've kind of laid down your execution there, but thank you very much. No, it's a great book. It's a tremendously clever idea, actually. Two people, they meet in an airport, an American man and an American woman. They meet totally accidentally at Heathrow. They're both having a drink before their flight, martinis. They have a bit too much to drink, especially the bloke. They get into conversation, she's very attractive, and he starts telling her about his domestic life in America.
But it's not until he says, quite flippantly really, that at times he feels he could kill his wife, because he's pretty sure, in fact he knows, she's having an affair with their architect who's helping them restyle their house. It's not until he says that he could kill her for that this other woman looks at him deadpan, shark eyes, and says, "Let me help you."
Yeah.
And at that moment, he doesn't seem to realise, but we do as readers, as the Americans say, he's got a live one there. He's caught like, a £350,000 tuna fish at the end of that line, and that's going to give him one hell of a ride, as it does us.
Because this woman, Lily, the one Ted meets at the airport, is a complete nightmare. She's a psychotic psychopath.
You can have both, yeah.
You can have both.
Yeah.
She's certainly one of them.
They're the dangerous ones.
Both
Judy.
of them, yeah. And she is a very unpleasant piece of work and very, very, very murderous. She has a strange past herself, doesn't she?
She does. There are reasons why she's become the person that she's become, and why she's become so comfortable with, if you like, revenge killing, or what you might call justifiable killing. And as we were saying in the interview with Peter, there is a tranche of society that looks at certain murders, at certain killings, whether it's a deeply unfaithful husband who's maybe abused his children and ends up being killed by the wife. People think, well, maybe he deserved it. Maybe he was asking for it. At the far end of the scale, you've got the Osama bin Ladens of this world, and people say, well, yeah, they deserved it, or the Mussolinis. I mean, where on the line, as we said in the interview, where on the line does the possibility of it being all right to kill somebody begin? And where does it end? It's a grey area. Well, I think here we know that it's wrong.
Yeah. Ted and Lily get involved in this strange gabot, which is very, very murderous. There are a lot of killings, a lot of violence, but it's a terrific novel. It's really, really good fun.
Yeah. She removed a slim paperback novel from her purse and began to read it. It gave me an opportunity to really look at her. She was beautiful. Long red hair, eyes lucid greenish blue like tropical waters, and skin so pale it was the almost bluish white of skim milk. If a woman like that sits down next to you at your neighborhood bar and compliments your drink order, you think your life is about to change. But the rules are different in airport bars, where your fellow drinkers are about to hurtle away from you in opposite directions. Time for another, I said, my treat. Why not, she said, and closed her book, placing it face up on the bar by her purse. The Two Faces of January by Patricia Highsmith. How's your book? Not one of her best. Nothing worse than a bad book and a long flight delay. What are you reading, she asked. The newspaper. I don't really like books. So what do you do on flights? Drink gin, plot murders. Interesting. She smiled at me. The first I'd seen.
From the Richard and Judy Book Club, I intend to read Nick Hornby's new novel, Funny Girl. I've read High Fidelity, I've read How to Be Good, and I think he's a really interesting writer who is my sort of writer.
Us by David Nichols. With this particular book, we go through various adventures, some very funny, when you laugh out loud, and then there's other moments where it's quite moving and quite poignant too.
I read Restless, which is a novel by William Boyd. And I really like those kind of books. They're sort of thriller crime books, and I really enjoyed this one. I thought the writing was absolutely excellent because it kept me gripped chapter after chapter. I read it in about sort of 3 days, but I just kept turning the pages on that one.
I've been reading The Miniaturist by Jessie Burton. Now, I'm not very far through, to be honest. Page 16, I'm struggling a little bit. But I'm being assured by lots of friends that it's well worth continuing, so I'm going to persevere a bit longer.
Richard, did I see you making notes there?
No,
Really?
don't be daft. Of course not. No, it just sparked an idea for a book.
Right.
Honestly, just notes for a book.
Speaking of which, here you go. Get reading this lot. My notes on our next text.
And Tyler's A Spool of Blue Thread.